When you're in love with a beautiful woman, it's hard. Everybody wants her. Everybody loves her. Maybe it's just an ego problem. The problem is that I've been cheated before by unserious friends and faint-hearted lovers. And every time it happens, it convinces me even more. When you're in love with a beautiful woman, you follow her eyes. Irony is a bitch. This 70s song came on some obscure FM station halfway from Denver to Santa Fe. I didn't have a single person I knew in Santa Fe. Almost everyone I consider a friend or family member lives in Denver. I have season tickets to the Colorado Avalanche. As far as I know, no one plays hockey in Santa Fe. My company has 6 offices scattered throughout Denver. I'm in the investment business. The entire staff of my new Santa Fe office will work out of an apartment 2 blocks from Presbyterian Medical Center. Another irony. I grew up Methodist. I should probably step back and start closer to the beginning of this story. My name is Thomas Rexford, but my friends call me no, not T-Rex, but Jaxie. Doesn't make sense, does it? While my friends were in college at Northwestern, I spent 3 years studying and working in the lumber business. Yes, I did become a lumberjack, so now you can catch the connection. Yes, I still have all my gear. And yes, friends sometimes call me when they need help with a fallen branch or a whole tree. I also still have my Harley Davidson, a 2005 Softail Standard FXST that I bought in Oregon that is in perfect condition. My ex-wife and I used to take long rides on that bike a lot, but those days are gone now. Anyway, I grew up in the Denver area and, except for my logging experience, I never left my hometown. After returning from Oregon, I went to work for my Uncle Mike, who owned his own investment company. He helped me get into the University of Denver with a finance degree. That was about 12 years ago. After 8 years, Uncle Mike retired and sold the business to me. I was his most loyal employee and best worker, so it was a no-brainer for both of us. At that time, we had 4 stores. I opened 2 more locations, one in Cherry Hills and one in Parker, increasing the staff from 26 to 31 people. Even in tough economic times, we took good care of our customers, and we weathered the storms that arose. Our financial performance remained strong. I mentioned my ex-wife, so I guess I should tell you about her. I knew Jessica Remington in high school, but we didn't run in the same circles. I played hockey, a blue-collar sport. Me and my buddies were rink rats, out on the ice every chance we got. We didn't do much besides hockey and homework. We only did homework because you had to have a 2.5 grade point average to make the team. She played soccer, was in the National Honor Society, and was a class officer. Our paths rarely crossed. I wasn't ugly, more of a gruff type than anything else. About 170 pounds tall, wet. I had long brown hair in high school because I was too cheap to cut it often. Girls who like hockey guys, and vice versa. It's an acquired taste, so I had a few dates here and there. Hockey guys say damn in most sentences, for example. Damn me, what a shitty game! Damn 5, great goal, Rexy. This was before Oregon, after which, as I said, I became Jaxie. What the hell? Get the puck out of the zone. Hey, Rexy, damn that number 17, he's such a shit! I hate the damn Wings. Detroit Red Wings. Okay, you get it. Hockey players are also a close-knit team. We hang out together all the time, and if we're on the same team, we're totally committed to each other. Even the parents of hockey players usually run together. That's damn true. Sorry, just wanted to give you another example. We all tend to have ugly stepchild syndrome. We think most people outside of the hockey world don't care about us, and we think we're a bunch of troublemakers. Both are probably true, so that's another reason why Miss Jessica Remington and I were never more than passing acquaintances in high school. One more thing you should know before we go any further. Jessica, Jess to me, is gorgeous. I don't mean cute or beautiful, I mean damn near stunning. When she walks into a room, people turn on her. Deep red hair, lithe build, 5'7", tall with a body that doesn't want to leave. Blazing green eyes, quick wit, and a pretty good temper. Her maternal grandmother came from Ireland in the 50s after the war. Starting in middle school, she could get any guy she wanted. She never dated the starting quarterback of the soccer team because he was an amazing athlete, but also a bit of a jerk. I know, that doesn't happen very often, does it? She never had a steady date in those days, she just hung out with a small group of friends. Once in a while I'd see her with a popular guy, but that was it. We didn't meet until 3 years after I had returned to Denver from the Great Northwest. I had gotten a little fat from climbing and chopping trees, not much body fat. I was playing in a men's hockey league with a few buddies when she walked in. Turns out her friend Trisha Carmichael had been bitten by the hockey bug. She was dating our goalie, Mike Tooney Toomer. I may have failed to mention that hockey players add an E, I, or XY to any name they hear. Jaxie, look at the bleachers. Is that Jessica Remington? Looks like it, Beamer. I can't believe she went near that damn rink. She's with Trisha, Tooney's girlfriend. Must be supporting her. I'm a red-blooded American kid, so I played around trying to get her attention. I had 2 goals and 1 assist. After the game, we showered and were heading through the warm-up area to the rink when I passed her. Hey Thomas, great game. Aren't you going to stop and say hi to an old school friend? Sorry, Jessica, I didn't realize we were friends in high school. It's good to see you. I stopped, put my bag down, and held out my hand to shake hers. I know it's stupid as hell, but I'm a hockey player and we're not the best at socializing. She smiled and took my hand. Well, maybe if you stepped away from the rink once in a while you'd notice. I thought you were a nice guy. Good God, what is that awful smell? Sorry, hockey bags have a unique odor, very specific. I'll run out and throw them in the Jeep so you won't have to be near them. I'll see you later. She looked a little hurt, but I didn't know why. We barely knew each other, and I was very polite when talking to her. Never once said damn. Beamer came running after me as I was getting into my very old but lovingly restored 2005 red Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. I seem to be partial to the 2005 models I drive or have driven. Hey Jaxie, are you going to O'Connell's for a beer? Jessica's coming, and I overheard her say she was wondering if turning into a hottie was turning into a snob. You might have a chance, bro, I don't understand why, but you better show up and not mess it up. As my grandpa Mitchell liked to say, I may be ugly, but I'm not stupid, so I agreed to meet at our favorite establishment. I arrived first, grabbed a Coors, and sat down at one of the top 10 tables. When she arrived, she immediately made her way toward me. Listen, Jaxie, is that what they call you? I'm sorry if I pushed you away, but your bag stinks. Nevertheless, I'd like to socialize a bit without the bag and catch up. Sure, Jess. I'd love to know what's going on in your life. For the next 2 hours, it seemed like it was just the 2 of us in the place. I bought her a beer and she bought me 2. We talked about the last few years. She went to UCLA and studied marine biology. After graduation, she worked as a gopher at SCMI, Southern California Marine Institute, for a year and learned to surf. But she was a mountain girl at heart and moved back to Denver. She is currently pursuing a teaching certificate and hopes to start teaching middle school math in the fall. She was majoring in math. For my part, I explained my name. She was genuinely interested in my experience as a logger. She liked my Jeep, and her eyes lit up when I mentioned Greta. She laughed when I explained the hockey lingo and even tried it on her. Hey, Jacker, can you get me a damn beer? That's Jaxie, not Jecker, I said, pointing to our server. Well, since you were trying to avoid me at the rink, I thought Jecker would be more appropriate, she said with a sly smile. Let's go have some fun, was all I could manage to say in response. She winked at me and replied, maybe. Before we left, we hugged politely and she gave me her cell phone number. Call me. I'd like to ride Greta if you'll take me. I've never ridden a pig, but it's on my wish list. I waited 2 days to call her. Believe me, I wanted to call her 5 minutes after we left, but I also didn't want to seem desperate. I wanted to be cool, calm, and collected, even though that wasn't really the case. Hey Jess, it's Thomas. I was wondering if you wanted to ride with me this Saturday. We could go to Leadville. There's a music festival going on there this weekend. Screw you, Jaxie. I have a social life of my own, and I can't abandon my plans at the last minute for some hockey player, even if he does score goals. I was a little confused and whispered, I'm sorry, Jess, I didn't mean to be too cavalier. Maybe next weekend? Screw you again, Jaxie. I'd love to join you. What time should I be ready? Well, that's about 2 hours, so how about 9 a.m.? I'll be ready. She sounded like she was ready to hang up. Hey, wait a minute, I don't know where you live. You're a smart guy, Jacker, figure it out. It's Jaxie, I replied, a little heated by her barb, but the line was already dead. I called Tooner, who in turn called Trisha and got Jess's address. Saturday morning, I knocked on the door of her apartment in Golden at 9 a.m. sharp. When she opened the door, I nearly fainted. She was wearing shorts, not short but not too far off either, a white tank top covered by a red and white plaid long sleeve shirt, and black cowboy boots with Texas stitching. She had a UCLA sweatshirt tied around her waist. She saw the look on my face and smiled. "I take it I passed the test?" she purred. "Yes, Mom, it is." I gave her my spare helmet, a white and black AGVX 3000, and we hit the road. The ride up there was great. Colorado summers are warm, but it never gets too hot in the mountains. The first part of the ride was comfortable, but once we entered the foothills, we stopped to put on warmer clothes. She wore her sweatshirt and I took my black Roland Sands Ronin biker jacket. You could see that she liked the way her chauffeur was dressed. "If we do this again, I'll have to dress like a biker girl," she said, poking me in the ribs. Leadville was amazing. We enjoyed several bands playing, ate killer tacos, and chatted for what seemed like hours on end. Everything went as well as it could have, however. This was the first time I saw guys ogling her. A few of them were discreet, a few nudged with an elbow in their girlfriend-wife's ribs. What made it even more disconcerting to me was that, looking back, I saw her encouraging this interaction. She was smiling or winking. However, I was a bit out of it at that moment and was just enjoying the interaction with a beautiful woman who was interested in me. When I dropped her off around midnight, we talked for a bit at her door, and she gave me a friendly kiss, thanking me for a fun day. "I really enjoyed being with you today, Thomas. Greta was great, and I hope you'll call me again sometime soon. Oh yeah, thanks also for not bringing your damn hockey bag." She told me that since everyone calls me Jack or Jackie, she wanted to be different and call me by my first name. Even though my family and grandparents were the only people on the planet who called me Thomas, who was I to argue? That day began 2 months of casual dating that led to us becoming exclusive. We texted every day and talked on the phone in the evenings. She got her teaching certificate and got a job at a local middle school. She had hoped for middle school, but decided that if she did well, it wouldn't take long to transition. After another 4 months, we decided to introduce her to distant relatives. I met her family, 2 younger sisters, Meg and Beth, 2 grandmothers, and 1 grandfather. There were cousins too, but none in Denver. She met my crew as well. Mom, Dad, my little brother Mikey, Uncle Mike, Mikey was named after him, Grandma and Grandpa Rexford, and Grandma Mitchell. I had a couple perverted cousins, but I decided to hang on to them. After several family gatherings, including Thanksgiving and Christmas, I decided it was time to take stock of where things were going and called a war council. My entourage has always consisted of Dad, Mikey, and Grandpa Rexford. We gathered on the porch of my house the first week of January. There was a fire blazing in the fireplace, so even with the temperature a dozen degrees, we were comfortable. We sat around the table holding a 15-year-old Glenlivet. "Well, guys, here's the deal," I began. "I've been dating Jess for almost 6 months. 4 of those have been exclusive, which is a first for me. I do have feelings for this woman, so before I spring into action, I'd like to know what you 3 think. I don't have to ask any of you to hold back. I know I will get the plain truth from each of you, and that is exactly what I want. I'd like to go from the youngest to the oldest, if that's okay with everyone. You have the most experience, Grandpa, so I want you to listen to the other 2 in case you want to challenge their opinions." Everyone nodded their heads. "Okay, Mikey, give it to me." Mikey was 20 months younger than me and always looked up to me when we were kids. But Mikey was smart. Not just book smart, although he had just finished his master's degree in applied math, whatever that was. He tried to explain it to me a couple times. I could understand some aspects of finance and business, but everything else was Greek to me. I realized, however, that Mikey loved to figure shit out. It was never enough for him to just understand something. He always wanted to poke holes in it, see if it really worked, or figure out how to make it better. That made him a streetwise weasel as well. 2 years after I returned from my job as a logger, Mikey was a senior at the University of California, Boulder. The next summer, I let him borrow my bike for a week. A year later, he told me he only rode it twice. Once on the first day and once the day before he returned it to me. The rest of the time he spent taking it apart and putting it back together again. I nearly fainted when he showed me pictures of Greta disassembled on the floor of his garage. Then I thought about killing him, but he told me about a couple improvements he'd made to the fuel system, and damn if I didn't notice, it ran better when I put it back together. Jaxie, if this were math, I would tell you that there are a number of hydrodynamic factors to consider before determining the best outcome. But why bore you with the details? I'll keep it simple and use small words so you can understand. First, Jess seems like a great girl. She has a good teaching job, seems to genuinely care about you, and doesn't take herself too seriously. Second, she doesn't have a long list of ex-boyfriends, so she doesn't exhibit a tendency toward a love it and dump it mentality. Third, you guys are demonstrating in front of us what looks like real affection for each other. This includes, but is not limited to, respect, physical touch, good communication, and realistic conflict resolution. Fourth, if you pursue this relationship, you will need to realize that anytime you go out, even with friends, you will need to be on your guard. She is incredibly beautiful, so every guy who is not gay will notice her, and many will probably try to get into a relationship with her. Fifth, the big X variable for me is the lack of time you've been together. You are in your early 20s, so I realize that settling down is probably becoming a good option for you. But in my equation, I'd like to see at least 6 more months before you make any kind of long-term commitment. You're both 27, so you have plenty of time to start a family. He finished and yielded the floor to his father. Thomas, you are an intelligent young man with a good head on your shoulders. 3 years of logging in the Northwest has smoothed out a lot of rough edges and helped you mature quickly. You have great business sense. As far as I can tell, you're also pretty wise about your personal life. You like your hockey friends, but you don't join them when they decide to do something stupid. I think you'd make a great husband. I agree with Michael. Jessica seems like a lovely person. I won't repeat his assessment, but I agree with his caution. I'm not sure you know her as well as you need to if you're going to ask her to marry you. Your mom and I dated from the age of 16 until we were married at 23. We had a couple of bad breakups, but it helped us to know what we wanted and what we were made of. A little more time in the courtship stage doesn't hurt. Dad, always noted for his brevity, looked at his father, our elder statesman, Grandpa Rexford. Grandpa leaned back in the soft leather chair, took a sip of whiskey, and looked toward the mountains as if he were deep in thought. After a pause, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Beauty is skin deep, but ugliness goes to the bone." Then he took another sip and looked at the hills again. Damn mysterious, isn't it? I was about to ask him to tell me his thoughts, but my father threw me a look that said, "Just be quiet and bear with it. It will happen soon." Grandpa started up again. Thomas, Jessica is a sweet girl with looks that could stop a truck or a train. I've watched you two closely and I can tell you're in love with her. She certainly has some good fibers in her. But there's something else too, and I can't pinpoint what it is. The easiest thing to say is that she seems to always need attention. She needs to be at the center. It's even harder to say that she's immature and narcissistic. She can't sit quietly on the sidelines. She needs to be at the center of everything going on. Silence is not peculiar to her, probably because no one shut her up when she was a child. Your dad grew up in the 70s, and for as long as I can remember, I could never understand his boundless devotion to rock and roll music. Like the rest of his generation, he listened to it all the time. I hated it. I listened to rock and roll any day of the week. Anyway, one day, I think when he was a senior in high school, which was 79, I heard the words to a song he was playing. It was Bob, and the song was about Hollywood. That's when Dad interrupted. "Bob Seger, Daddy, the song Hollywood Nights?" Yeah, that's right. Anyway, it's a song about a young guy who gets his heart broken by some beauty queen. There's a line. She was born with a face that allowed her to get what she wanted. He saw that face and lost control. Holy crap, I remember thinking to myself. A song that actually makes some sense in real life. My point, Thomas, is this is Jessica. She can get anything she wants because of her looks. She doesn't always take advantage of it, but she sure knows she's got it. This is the potentially ugly part of your relationship. Will she flirt with other men after marriage just because she wants something? Even if she is truly faithful to you, won't those men realize it and come on to her? How much time will you have to spend looking over your shoulder? Will she respect you enough to stop this shit? I don't know. My advice is a little more specific than your dad's or Mikey's. I like the slower approach, but I'd add one more element. Ask your uncle for a 6-month vacation, come back to Oregon and work in the timber business for a while. But this time, take Jess with you. Be alone where she doesn't know anybody and make a good effort to settle in. I'm sure she can substitute teach, so you're not asking her to put her career on hold. Mike won't like losing his right arm for a while, but I'll talk to him about how it's going to be okay. He'll be fine. Take long walks and talk about everything. About life, work, faith, children, fears, hopes and dreams, and more. See if you have enough in common to build a life together. If she refuses, that's an indication that you need to tone it down a bit. If she agrees, even somewhat nervously, you have a good foundation to build on. Regardless, your dad and Mikey are right. She's the kind of woman who can get whatever and whomever she wants, and it's best to deal with that sooner rather than later. If she's ugly inside, you want to know it now, not 5 years from now when you have a kid or two and you're a disaster. Great advice from 3 smart guys, all of whom loved me. We spent the rest of the evening happily watching the AVs destroy Vancouver, with the occasional trip back to Jessica's place. I slept in a few nights and then decided it was best to split the difference. I didn't really want to go back to the Northwest, but I wanted to find a way to have more alone time for the 2 of us. I also decided that I wouldn't propose for at least 4 months. There's not much point in asking for advice if you're not going to take it. I should have made this decision alone and taken responsibility for the outcome, but only a fool refuses wise counsel. I believed I had taken the best of what was offered to me. 2 weeks later, I took Jess out to dinner at a small local pub we both liked in Golden. Burgers and beer, nothing fancy. Just a chance to sit and talk for a couple hours. The owner of the place was my buddy who we played hockey with, Richie, and he was happy to seat us in the back of the place, away from the bulk of the customers. So, are we just casual today, Thomas? Or do we have an agenda? She was gorgeous, but she also had a good head on her shoulders. Jess, I learned, was very intuitive. I guess somewhere in the middle, I began. You know I've never seriously dated anyone, but I can unequivocally say that I've fallen in love with you. In that case, I don't know the best thing to do. I know we're in an exclusive relationship, but that's not the same as being committed to a long-term relationship. However, in my heart of hearts, I believe that I want to move in that direction. If you agree, I suggest some next steps. Of course, this is only a starting point. What I've sketched out in my head is only the beginning of the conversation. Whatever we decide, we will decide together. Thomas, I'm flattered. You just made up about 8 sentences without saying damn. It's obviously something you've been thinking about for a long time. I'll have you know, so have I. Last Saturday, Trisha and I stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about this topic. I'm scared because I'm falling in love with you too, and I've never been in such a serious relationship in my life. So why don't we start by you telling me what you've come up with so far? For the next 20 minutes, I laid out my thoughts. At least 4 more months of seeing only each other. More alone time on weekends and at least 2 evenings a week together, talking about certain topics. Invite older couples we respect to counseling to make sure we are physically compatible. My eyebrow went up at that last suggestion, but I feigned innocence. Come on, babe, I mean, I know you're hot, but what if you're not very good in bed? I got a punch in the arm for that. Wanna come, handsome? She flashed her intense green eyes at me. In hockey lingo, one player asks another if he wants to drop the gloves and fight. Then she broke out into a wide grin. I agree with all of your ideas. If I remember last Tuesday correctly, you've already had practice with the last option, but there are a few things I can teach you. Let me get the check and you take me to school right now, I offered with an evil grin. Well, how about we start with the first lesson right here? Jess added a few minor ideas as we drank the last of our beers and then jumped on Greta. When we got back to my apartment, I was already putting the key in the front door lock when Jess whispered in my ear. Well, I'm not sure I should be alone with a boy hockey player. I think I'd better go home before you take advantage of me and ruin my reputation. In one smooth motion, I swung the door open, turned and said, "No way, girl." I slammed the front door shut and headed for the bedroom. An hour later, after we got busy, we fell asleep in each other's arms. My last thought before I fell asleep was to hope that it was really true because it was amazing. 4 months of intentionally investing time into our relationship went almost smoothly. I say almost, because in hindsight, it was a flaw in the armor that I should have paid more attention to. About 3 months later, we went out on a Friday night to a local pub that had live bands on the weekends. It was just the 2 of us. We had a few drinks and Jess was teaching me how to dance. We were having a blast when I excused myself and went to the men's room. I was only gone for a couple of minutes, but when I came back, Jess was standing next to our table talking to a guy I couldn't recognize, but he looked familiar. He was standing too close, and Jess wasn't holding him at arm's length. I immediately felt uneasy, remembering my three friends' warning. I was sober enough to stay calm, though. They hadn't noticed me yet, so I walked over to the bar and ordered a couple more beers, all the while watching them. I couldn't hear them, but Jess was clearly casting a spell on me. She giggled at his comments, occasionally placing her hand on his forearm. If she missed me, she certainly didn't show it, looking around for me. He was clearly enjoying himself. Okay, that was enough. I turned back to the table, and Jess caught me out of the corner of her eye. For a moment, there was a look of guilt on her face. Then she just smiled at me, as if her son had risen and sat in my place and purred, "Thomas, you remember Wayne from high school?" Wayne smirked slightly but extended his hand. "Hey Thomas, good to see you. It's been about 10 years. You look great." I shook his hand and said hello. Let me digress and say that there are a couple things you should realize right away if you're paying attention. He called me Thomas, not Jaxie or Rexy, meaning he wasn't a hockey buddy. So at best, he was an acquaintance, not a friend. Second, you should have realized by the look on Jessica's face that she realized she had crossed the line. Now the question was how she would react. She missed her first chance. "Wayne, why don't you pull up a chair and join us for a few minutes? Are you here with someone?" First strike. "Thanks, don't mind if I do." "No, I'm just here with a couple buddies, no one I can't ditch for a while to hang out with old friends." "I can't believe you're flying solo." "There are a lot of ladies out there who need to pay attention." Second strike. "You're too kind, Jess. I've dated a few girls and one or two of them got serious. But not as successful as Thomas." Jessica never managed to pull me into the conversation. She also didn't thank me for the beer she was currently enjoying. She just kept chatting with good old Wayne. "Well, why don't you spin me around on the dance floor and we'll see if we can get some girls to sit up and pay attention to you." Strike 3. Not once did she ask me if I was okay. Didn't even look at me until she stood with Wayne, leading him by the hand to the dance floor. "Be back in a little while, babe." "Don't flirt with anyone while I'm gone." I had to hand it to Wayne. He looked very nervous. He was an inch or two taller than me, but as far as I could remember, he was a clean-cut, rich boy. He'd probably never been in a fight in his life. I'd had a few skirmishes in high school and a few in Oregon. Truth be told, I got my ass kicked the first week I worked in the logging industry. I drank too much and was rude to a redneck who was 2 inches shorter than me. He ripped me off while everyone was enjoying the show. Later we shook hands and he took me under his wing, but since then I've been diligently learning to keep my temper in check. Obviously Wayne didn't go to this school, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that he knew I did. "Do you mind if I dance with Jess?" he asked over his shoulder. "Of course he is," Jessica answered for me in a tone that tolerated no objection. There's no fourth strike in baseball too damn bad. Wayne saved himself from a beating by having the sense to at least try to ask. An attempt to honor the unspoken male code. Jessica, on the other hand, was in for a rude awakening. When they returned to the table, I was gone. Greta and I had a lovely moonlit ride home that allowed me to cool down a bit. Jess and I didn't live together. Maybe I'm old school, but I think it's disrespectful for a man to ask a woman to live with him without putting a ring on her finger. But in my opinion, it's too easy for a guy to try to get what he wants from a woman and then just walk away if they aren't official in the eyes of God and the state. The ride home took 20 minutes. Another 20 passed before the reports started coming in. Apparently, it was more than 1 or 2 dances. "Thomas, where are you? I can't find you." "Home." "What? Why are you leaving without picking me up?" "You looked like you were having too much fun with Wayne." "Come back and get me now, you bastard." "You're embarrassing me." "Good night, Jess. I'm more than sure you'll be able to make it home." My phone rang before I could turn it off, but I ignored it and turned it off. I figured I could get a good night's sleep before the storm of shit that was going to erupt in the morning. I was drinking my second cup of coffee around 7:30 a.m. when Jess burst in on me with her green eyes blazing. We didn't live together, but she had her own key. "You son of a bitch, Thomas. How dare you leave me like that? Are you such a little boy that you ran away just because you were hurt? Are you such a big baby? Hell, you'd better explain yourself right now if you want me to stay." Her nostrils flared and her face was red with anger. If I hadn't been a lumberjack for 3 years, I might have been scared. "Would you like to sit down and have a cup of coffee, Jessica?" "No, screw it. I don't want to sit and drink coffee with a juvenile like that." I kept my tone calm. I suppose that might have made her more angry, but I wasn't about to get into an argument with an irritated Irish girl. Okay, suit yourself. Let me be blunt, Jess. I am madly in love with you and I want only one thing, for us to be together. However, I will never tolerate disrespect. What you did last night was unforgivable. We're not dating. We don't have an exclusive relationship. We're committed to each other. We agreed on that. We've even mapped out how to intentionally deepen our love in hopes that we'll be together for life. Wayne was standing in your personal space and you didn't support him. In fact, when I first saw the two of you, you touched his arm, showing openness towards him. Secondly, you did not ask me if Wayne was welcome at our table. You simply ignored me and asked him to sit down. Then you flirted with him by telling him how much other women should pay attention to him. And finally, without consulting me, you asked him to dance. In doing so, you never once looked in my direction. Even Wayne noticed it and tried to ask me if everything was okay. You didn't even let me speak for myself or answer his question. So tell me, Jess, what's respectful about it? How does it show my love or show Wayne that we're together? How does it show your love for me? You're so great, Jess. Guys are always paying attention to you, and I know you know they do. In a way, you like that attention. In and of itself, it's not a big deal. However, when you treat me like I'm not an equal, and you have the final say in everything about us, I think that's bullshit. I'm not saying I was completely right in leaving last night. It was childish in some respects. However, if we are to be ourselves, it has to be mutual. What you did made me furious. I'm not going to compete for you. We're past that stage. You don't need to compete for me. As I see it, I'm yours. That gives you the right to expect love, respect, and honor from me, and I expect the same from you. If that's not the way you see it, just say so. It'll hurt like hell, but I'll respect your choice and move on. However, if you love me and want to continue our relationship, you must respect and honor me. I will not tolerate anything less. Look on the bright side, Jess. What if I was on the other foot and some schoolgirl molested me in front of you? How would you feel about the fact that last night when you came back from the restroom, someone we hadn't seen in 10 years was flirting heavily with me? What if I had ignored you and danced with her without even asking your permission? It was deathly quiet for a moment, Jess staring at me. I was sure she was going to turn and walk away, but tears came to her eyes. Her lower lip began to quiver. Without warning, she threw herself into my arms and started sobbing. I just put my arms around her. After a moment, she caught her breath. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I didn't stop to think about it. It was horrible of me. I can't believe I treated you so badly. I love you and I want to live with you. I don't know what came over me, but I was wrong. Please forgive me. She started crying again. I held her in my arms for a moment longer, and then pushed her away slightly so I could look her in the eye. She was sincere. Jess, I forgive you. I love you. But we have to be clear. We have to put ourselves first. I know guys will always hit on you. It will be a part of my life until we're 90, and even then the nursing home guys will still want you. We can't disrespect each other like that. I know, Thomas, that's exactly what it is. She wiped her face with her sleeve. Oh, I must look terrible. Give me a moment to wash my face, and then I'd love to have a cup of coffee and discuss things further with the intention of growing in our love. 5 months later, we were married on a Saturday morning near Breckenridge. It was a gorgeous late May morning with sunny skies and temperatures in the mid-60s. It was a pleasant event, even though my hockey buddies couldn't contain their congratulations. Surrounded by family and friends, we made a vow to forsake all others and live together as husband and wife. We enjoyed the day with those we loved the most until 6 p.m. when we headed out to enjoy our honeymoon. Greta drove us to DWI where we boarded a flight to Cabo. 9 amazing days later, we were back in Denver at the beginning of summer. Over the past few months, Jess and I have had many long conversations, taken many long walks, and I think touched on some issues that are important to both of us. We even went to a therapist where we dealt with some important factors in our relationship, such as family or background, expectations, and communication. All in all, I felt that I had listened carefully and accepted the advice of the 3 men who loved me the most, and was on a journey of a lifetime with the only woman I truly loved and who truly loved me. How is it that just 4.5 years after my divorce from Jess, I'm driving down the highway single again? I thought I had listened carefully and put into practice the advice I had received. I believed that Jess and I had traversed a tremendous amount of emotional, psychological, and relational territory before and after we married. I believed that we were completely honest with each other and made a commitment to honesty, love, care, and respect. As I've seen firsthand, it doesn't mean a damn thing if the other person doesn't make the same promise in their heart. It turned out that Jess had different definitions of these words that she never shared with me. There were patterns in her life that she was unwilling or unable to give up, and that put us at risk as a couple. Truth be told, Grandpa Rexford was right. Jessica was a beautiful woman on the outside, but her ugliness came down to her bones. A year earlier, Jess learned that her application for admission to the local high school had been accepted. She would be teaching Algebra 2 and trigonometry to 10th graders. There were 2 older teachers in the math department who were a couple of years away from retirement. If all went well, Jess would be teaching AP Math in the not-too-distant future. So claimed her department chair, Dr. Charles Wellborn, or as he came to be known, Chuck the Devil. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the first 2 months of the school year, Jess was more than excited. Every night she would tell me about her classes and what the children had learned. It was obvious that she loved it when math brought joy to the children. She loved teaching high school math, and a big part of her enthusiasm was seeing the kids do well. Sometimes she would talk about Dr. Wellborn and what a great mentor he was to her and other aspiring teachers in the department. I didn't think much of it except that he was a nice guy who wanted everyone to do their best. I should have been on my guard, but he was 15 years older than her, married, and had 3 children, all in their teens. I first met him in early October. After being told about his amazing personality and leadership, I was a bit taken aback. He was not a weak guy. His height was probably around 160 centimeters. He wasn't heavy, looking trim and slim for a man in his early 40s. He wasn't bald, and there were no gray hairs on his head. He wasn't boring, carrying on a pleasant conversation. But nothing about him stood out. Nothing impressive or surprising. From the way Jess talked, I expected to meet Wayne Gretzky in teaching math, but he seemed more like Barry Melrose. I'll save time for those who aren't hockey fans. Melrose was selected 36th in the 1978 draft, played about 300 games of professional hockey, and had a thoroughly mediocre career. For me, it was Dr. Wellborn. Kind of a nice guy, but totally unimpressive. I never understood why Jess was so fascinated by him. To each his own, I thought. Jess liked his support and guidance, so who was I to judge? I listened politely while she talked about how inspiring he was. It was at this point that I noticed that about 90% of our conversations were about her work and about 75% were about Wellborn. When I talked about my work, hockey, or family, she would smile and listen for a couple minutes and then go back to herself and her world. Having never been married, I just assumed that this is how most marital conversations go. I never minded finding out about her day, her job, even her boss. But sometimes I really wanted her to ask me about my job, family, etc. Unfortunately, she rarely did, and just as sadly, I never brought it to her attention until it was too late. It was the week after Thanksgiving, and I was on the phone with my mom. As wonderful as the men in my family are, my mom can reach out to any of them. We were talking about the upcoming Christmas holidays and trying to synchronize our holiday calendars. No sooner had we hung up the phone than my mom switched gears. "Thomas, how are you and Jess?" "Okay, Mom, okay." "Really? Are you sure, Thomas?" Obviously, it wasn't a question. "Yes, I think so, Mom. Why do you ask?" "Well," Mom paused. "Mom, you are always free to talk to me. I know you won't gossip about Jess or speak ill of her. If something is bothering you, I know it's out of love, so please tell me what you're thinking." "It's nothing special, Thomas. It's just that she's always talking about herself and her work. I've never heard her brag about you unless someone does it first. I've never heard her ask you any serious questions about what you do or what you're thinking. That strikes me as odd, son. Enthusiasm in a relationship is a two-way street. You're always supporting her and paying attention to what she's telling you. I guess I'm just wondering why she doesn't reciprocate you." She continued. "I haven't talked to her about it because I'm her mother-in-law, not her mom. I don't want her to think I'm siding with the two of you. In my mind, you two are one, so I'm for both of you. If I broach the subject, I'm afraid it will look like she's not good enough for my boy, and I don't want her to think that." We talked some more and I thanked her for her concern. Aloud, I did not agree or disagree with her observations. However, in my heart, I felt that she had picked up on the anxiety that was growing in my heart. I thanked her for her thoughts and told her that I would seriously consider her words. I didn't mention it to Jess right away, but I decided to start keeping a little record of our conversations. It wasn't something detailed, and I wasn't trying to trap Jess into getting my point across. I work with numbers and specifics, so it was easy for me to start just keeping track of our conversations. That's how I was able to come up with the percentages I mentioned earlier. We talked almost exclusively about Jess and her world. I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach when I remembered the Seagar song. She was born with a face that allowed her to get her way. Jess was amazing in many ways, but in this area she was immature and selfish. However, she was used to always getting her way. I decided I would schedule a weekend getaway so we could talk and enjoy each other's company. We had done this periodically in the first 3 years of marriage, so it wouldn't be a surprise to Jess. This weekend we would bring up things we loved about our relationship or issues of concern. I knew Jess wouldn't feel taken aback if I behaved in this way. I was thrilled when I booked a cabin for us near Aspen, knowing that we would be able to relax, enjoy each other, and talk freely about us. I checked our general schedule before bailing and saw no school conflicts for next weekend. I'd miss the hockey game and have to put up with a few "what the hell Jaxie" type comments, but I was sure I'd survive, especially if I did penance and bought a first-round pick after the next game. I couldn't wait to lay out my plan to Jess when she got home. Right after dinner, I shared my plan with her. I thought she would be excited and looking forward to the trip. Wrong. She paused for a few seconds longer than I expected, and then she said, "Thomas, I'd like you to consult with me first," she began. "Charles is planning a mandatory faculty meeting for next Saturday morning. He wants to present some new ideas about the curriculum for next semester." Her face read annoyance, not disappointment that we couldn't spend the weekend together. "Jess, to be honest, I checked with you. I took a close look at our shared calendar and it didn't have this on it. How long ago was this scheduled?" The fact that Dr. Wellborn had become Charles didn't escape my attention, but I forgot about it for a moment. "About a week ago, I guess," Jess answered, not as confidently as she should have been. I'm sure I put it on the list, but it may have slipped my mind. This was a first since the shared calendar had been her idea. I was furious. "Damn it, Jess, you work long enough as it is. And now Wellborn thinks he controls your weekends too? That's not fair, Thomas. Charles wants the best for our students and the math department. He just wants to help everyone. I don't think one Saturday is such a big deal. I'm sure we can find another weekend to go away together." "That's not the point, Jess," I replied, growing increasingly frustrated. "We've been using this calendar for months now, and it's become a habit for us. It was your idea. I remember 2 months ago I forgot to put Wednesday night dinner with a couple clients on the calendar. As I recall, you read me the riot act, demanding that we change the appointment. I'm sure what's fair for me is fair for you." "Damn it, Thomas. You're making a big deal out of such a small thing. We can just reschedule." "I'm sorry, Jess, you're right," I said sarcastically, so she could see where I was going with this. "Please forgive me for treating you the way you treat me. Forgive me for wanting to plan a nice weekend with my wife. Forgive me for encroaching on Charlie's important schedule." She started to reply something angrily, but as I left the room and headed for the exit, she was talking to my ass. I jumped on Greta and rode around for about an hour to cool off. The hour turned into 3 when I stopped by the local pub for a couple or 3 beers. When I got home, it was freezing cold. We had only seen each other in passing and hadn't spoken to each other. I ended up working in my home office for a couple more hours and collapsed on the couch. I've been an early riser since my days working in the Northwest. Loggers can party late into the night, but work starts before the sun comes up, and if you want to get paid, you can't show up late. I leave the house at 5:30. Jess usually got up around 6:15, so we didn't cross paths. At the office, I canceled the reservation, which cost me a $100 deposit. Not a huge amount, but it made me sad. Later in the afternoon, I noticed that her faculty meeting did get on the calendar, along with a conference for math teachers in Colorado Springs the second weekend in January, and 2 girls' nights out between then and there. Later in the afternoon, I sent Jess an immature text. "Going straight to the rink after work. Game at 7 and a few beers afterward. I'll be home around 11. If it's unclear, check the shared calendar. It's been there for the last 2 months." I got nothing in response. The following week, we continued our standoff, talking only as needed. I was waiting for her to apologize for not updating her calendar and for what I thought was her indifferent attitude about my mistake. I think she was waiting for me to remember that the universe revolves around her and come crawling back. We can both be stubborn, so we were both disappointed in the other's lack of recognition. The following Saturday, Jess was already dressed and ready to leave, when at the breakfast table she surprised me with a serious kiss. "Thomas, I hope we can talk like adults today and make up. I understand your disappointment about this weekend, but I'm sure we can work things out." With those words, she winked slyly at me and headed for the exit. No apologies, no admitting her mistake, just doing what she wanted, expecting me to obey. Seeger screamed in my ears, "A face that will let her get her way." I grumbled for about half an hour and then decided I wasn't going to waste the day. The door to the porch had been creaking loudly for the last 2 weeks, so I decided to take it off the hinges, oil it, and put it back in place. I also thought of a couple other small projects that could be done. After taking the door off, I realized we were out of oil 1, so I jumped in my Jeep and headed to the hardware store. Mick's store has always existed. It was founded by the first Mick just after the First World War and has remained in the family for the last 90 years. Mick of 4 now ran the place along with his 2 sons, Mick V and Eddie. I played hockey with Eddie, and Mick V, ironically, only worked at the store on weekends because he taught math at the same school as Jess. Imagine my surprise when I walked into the store and V was helping a woman pick out a good snowblower. He smiled and waved at me as I walked in. The strange look on my face must have surprised him, because he caught up with me a couple minutes later in Section 9, where I was taking butter. "Hey Jaxie, what's up, buddy? Heard you had a goal and 2 assists on Thursday. Eddie said you played pretty damn good for an old man." "Hey 5, yeah, it was a good night. Sorry if I gave you a weird look when I walked in, but I thought Wellborn was having a middle school math department meeting this morning. You decided the control room couldn't live without you and quit your job?" Now it was his turn to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Jaxie, but you seem to have made a mistake. I'm still teaching, but Dr. High and Mighty Wellborn hasn't scheduled a meeting for today. He's an arrogant prick, of course, but even he's not stupid enough to encroach on our weekend. Did Jess tell you we had a meeting?" Somehow I kept my composure. I must have misunderstood Jess's words as she flew out the door. Then I had another thought. "Hey, 5th, does the math department ever go to study conferences?" "Yes, of course," he replied. For about a second I was relieved, but then he continued. "The next seminar will be at Estes Park at the end of March. I plan to attend about half of the seminar and then hit the slopes." Trying to breathe and act as normal as possible, I replied. "Sounds like you 5, only I'm surprised you plan on having half the meetings." "Yeah, I know. I must be getting down on myself in my old age. I'll talk to you later, Jaxie. I'm going to go make sure Eddie doesn't try to take credit for selling my snowblower." And with that, he was gone, taking all my trust in Jess with him. I paid for the oil and jumped into the Jeep. Damn bitch, why the hell is she lying to me? 2 times? I drove past the school looking for her car. I checked each of the 4 parking lots, not just the one by the math classroom. No cars, no lights on, no one home. My mind was racing with my heart, and I needed to calm down and think. I assumed the worst, and we all know where assumptions lead. I needed to know some facts about my wife. Where she was, what she was doing, and if she was with that damn Charles. I couldn't go home and just wait. I drove to a coffee shop, grabbed a cup, and sat in the back of the bistro. An hour later, with a notepad in hand, I had a plan. My insurance agent was a guy from my hockey team. Pat Cook, Cookie, was surprised that I was calling on a Saturday morning. "Jaxie, did you break your leg trying to work on your pathetic skating skills?" "I'd like to, Cookie. I need a few minutes of your time. Can I meet you in your office?" He realized from the tone of my voice that I didn't have a broken bone, but this was serious. 15 minutes later, we were sitting in his conference room. "When you suspect insurance fraud, do you have a private investigator doing the digging for you?" "Sure, Jaxie, but what the hell do you need a private investigator for?" "Cookie, this is completely confidential, isn't it?" He looked at me as if I had just inflicted the greatest insult in the history of the world. "Sorry, kid, but my head is spinning right now. I think Jess might be having an affair, and I need to find out without anyone finding out. Do you have a guy who could help me?" "I hope it's not what you're thinking." "No, I don't have a boyfriend, but I do have a girlfriend. And she's the best. Almost invisible, tough as nails, and always gets to the bottom of things. If you need, I can set you up with her right now. She's not cheap, but she's the best. Thank you, Cookie. Yes, I hope I'm only spending money on my imagination. Please call. Her name was Ella Compton. Since private investigators have to work odd hours, she agreed to meet me later in the afternoon. I went home, finished the porch door, showered, grabbed a bite to eat, and met her at 1 o'clock. I sent Jess a note letting her know I had some errands to run and would be home around 3. Ella was a relatively short woman, maybe 5 feet tall, but if you looked closely, you could tell that she was not to be messed with. She smiled politely as we talked, but there was an iron tone in her voice that was consistent with an unserious approach to her work. I laid it out for her as best I could. As we were finishing up, she said, "If you want a detailed report, it will take several weeks. My investigation will drag on into the new year, since you believe she is lying about the conference. I'm not cheap, Mr. Rexford, but I can promise you that by the time I'm done, you'll know one way or the other. I need you to wire me $1,500 and I'll get started. I'll invoice you for the rest of the money when the job is finished." I sent the deposit while she asked a couple more questions. We got up, shook hands, and left. I felt as low as I'd ever felt, but I knew I had to keep up appearances. I had to be dishonest with everyone I loved and respected, but secrecy was the only way to get to the truth. Jess was home when I got there, and she was working in the kitchen, humming to herself as I walked in. In a good mood after having fun with Chuck? I thought to myself, kissing her on the cheek and telling her I needed a quick shower. Luckily, I had tickets to the AVS Preds hockey game that night, and Jess rarely went with me. I was taking Mikey with me, and she was more than pleased. Before I left, I lied for the first time. "Jess, I'm sorry I overreacted this weekend. I wanted us to go away, but I shouldn't have talked to you the way I did. Please forgive me." "Of course, Thomas. I understand your frustration. I wish we could go too, but we will go soon, just the two of us." Bitch to the end, huh? Thought I. The next 6 weeks were a living hell. I put on a happy face at the office, at home, and with my family. Christmas was brutal. Jess and I exchanged gifts and went to my in-laws for lunch and then her family for dinner. New Year's Eve was even worse, if that's even possible. We went out to dinner and dancing. We did it in our hotel room. The physical part was the worst. It wasn't love. New Year's Eve was on Friday, so we were still celebrating on Sunday, having dinner at Mom and Dad's. Grandma and Grandpa Rexford were with us. We were hugging and kissing goodbye around 6 p.m. when Grandpa quietly pulled me aside. "I'm sorry, Thomas, I really am." He whispered so that no one else could hear. "Sorry for what, Grandpa?" I replied, genuinely not understanding what he meant. "I'm sorry I was right." "How's that?" He smiled sadly. "I was right about the ugliness getting to the bone," he said, nodding at Jess. "Just know that we're all with you no matter what happens." I wanted to fall into his arms and burst into tears. He saw the tears in my eyes. "It's nothing like that, Thomas. You'll get through this. There will be time for tears later. For now, just do what you have to do. We Rexfords always stick together and take care of each other." In that moment, the strength he gave me assured me that I could handle it. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Ella's office across from her desk. She had called the day before to tell me that the report was ready. I asked if we could meet at her work instead of mine. If I got the news, I figured I wouldn't want to crumble in front of my coworkers. She began. "I'm sorry to tell you, Thomas, that you spent a lot of money to find out that your wife is a lying whore. I suppose you've prepared for the worst, but if you need a minute or two, I'll give you time to come to your senses." "No, go on, please." She was the first to introduce the new nickname, which caught on. "Well, Chuck entertains the hell out of your wife. Usually at the Hampton Inn in Inglewood. I assume they choose that location since you don't have offices in the area. They're very discreet. At work and around coworkers, they act professional. Very discreet. They drive separately to a rest stop or truck stop where they will never run into family or friends. Far enough off the road, but not so far that they can't get back to their home quickly if necessary. As you might expect, there was no conference in Colorado Springs. They spent this weekend in Gunnison in a remote cabin outside of town. They meet about once every 8 or 9 days. As far as I can tell, they've met at least 6 times since you hired me, not counting the weekend. I have audio and videotapes of their last 2 love dates in the Hamptons, thanks to a couple $100 and a friendly reference guy. Don't worry, I'll put it on your tab. I also have pictures of them meeting, driving to their untold hotel, getting in and out. I also have some conversations from their phones thanks to the listening devices in their cars. The evidence is irrefutable. She handed me a 2-inch thick folder across the table. It's all here, though. I advise you not to look at the pictures or listen to the recordings too soon. For some reason, I managed to remain calm throughout our conversation. I asked her a few clarifying questions, and she answered each one thoroughly. When we were done, I asked her to email the final invoice to my personal work address. I gathered my folder and got up to leave. Mr. Rexford, if I may, this is the best and worst part of my job. I'm picky about my clients. I try to stay away from liars and scammers. I never help anyone cheat on their spouse, co-workers, or family members. I have checked you out, and I know you are a good, even great guy. You don't deserve this. I hate to break this news to you. However, that's also the best part of my job, because now you know the truth. You can deal with it as you see fit. You are no longer in the dark. You may have been an unknowing toady, but no more. Now you can take back control of your life and choose the right course. Thank you, was all I could manage to mumble. One last thing, she said. I did some more digging on Chuck. This isn't his first rodeo. If you need help burning that bastard down, I'll help you at no extra charge. Too bad it's not the 1880s now, or we could have strung him up before the sun went down. As I was leaving, I noticed that it had begun to snow. A gray gloom seemed to envelop my whole world. I sat in my Jeep for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do next. 5 minutes later, I called Jess. She answered on the 3rd ring. My second lie. Hey babe, I had to run out to Boulder this afternoon to see a client. It's snowing crazy here right now, and I still have a couple hours of work to finish, so I won't be home until tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, babe. I was going to surprise you and go to your hockey game tonight. Please be careful and drive safely on the way home tomorrow. I love you. Thanks, bye, was all I could say. I was about to head to my folks' house, but on a hunch, I drove to the Hampton Inn in Inglewood. I parked across 2 lots in a spot from where I could watch the entrance. My Jeep was hidden from view by the few bushes that lined the parking lot. I decided to wait for an hour. While I waited, I called Cookie and told him the bad news. Jaxie, I'm sorry as hell. Thanks, Cookie. I need you to cover for me in front of the guys tonight. Make sure they know the next keg is on me. I'll call you tomorrow, but in the meantime, you better score a couple goals tonight. Somehow, just talking like we usually do helped. You got it, brother. I didn't have to worry about whether my ex-wife would show up with her lover. About 35 minutes later, Chuck showed up and headed down the hall. I guess they felt safe enough while I was out of town to go separately, because 5 minutes later, evil bitch Jess arrived and parked at the far end. She went to the side door where her boss met her, opening the door and giving her a quick kiss. I threw up all over the bushes. After getting in the car, I went to my mom and dad's house. On the way, I called my dad and told him everything. He was silent, which in my dad's case means he is furious. I asked him to tell my mom because at that moment, I didn't have the energy to repeat the story. Telling him I'd be there in about 20 minutes, I hung up the phone and cried the whole way. When I pulled up, I saw Mikey, Uncle Mike, and Grandpa's cars. My mom opened the door before I reached the steps. I collapsed into her arms, sobbing like a little baby. When I came to, the 6 of us were seated in the living room. Mom wanted to feed me, and Dad poured me a stiff drink. I refused both, not trusting my stomach. I spent the next 30 minutes telling them the story as I knew it. I hadn't read the dossier yet, but I knew enough from my conversation with Ella to set the stage. Everyone sat in silence and let me spill my guts. I cried all the way through while my mom stroked my back, just like when I was a kid. By the time I was done, everyone had tears in their eyes. Grandfather spoke first, like a patriarch. Thomas, I know we are all deeply saddened by your pain. I know that each of us would like a few minutes alone with Jess and her boss. We are all outraged to the core, but we must be wise. Speaking out is certainly the right thing to do, but it would be the wrong approach. Why don't we chat some more, and then I suggest we adjourn for the evening. You take a strong sleeping pill, and we'll pick this up in the morning. Tonight's protracted discussion is not going to do any good. But as I told you a few weeks ago, we are all with you, no matter what. Everyone looked at Grandpa with wide eyes. It began to dawn on them that he knew what was going on, even if everyone else hadn't noticed. No one was upset that he hadn't told them sooner. Everyone understood that he had his own methods, and every member of our clan trusted him as the cornerstone of our family. "You're right, Dad," Dad finally replied. Then he asked, "What should we do about Thomas's absence tomorrow? Will Tess expect him to call or expect him to be home by early afternoon?" Uncle Mike jumped up. "I can take care of it, brother." Thomas told Jess he's up to his ears in troubles in Boulder. This storm was lucky enough to give him a small window, but I can open it wide. I'll call Jess first thing in the morning and explain that the situation is serious and only Thomas can handle it. He'll have to talk to her tomorrow, but I can assure her that everything will take another day or two. Since she's in school, she won't be tempted to go to Boulder to present herself as a loving wife. We agreed to this plan with a couple of additions from Mom and Dad. When we were done, my brother came over and hugged me like it was the last time we would be together. Tears again. Uncle Mike hugged me too. Grandpa came over and took my face in his hands. "You're going to get through this, Thomas. You have my word on it." When everyone left, I went to the guest room, pulled a couple of Unisom pills out of the medicine cabinet, and in less than 20 minutes, the medication combined with emotional exhaustion did the trick. I was out like a light. The next morning, I was surprisingly calm and determined. Sadness was still my primary emotion, but Jess had made her choices, including ignoring her marriage vows and completely neglecting me, and now it was time for me to make mine. My family loved me, and that foundation would help me endure. My long-term plan was beginning to take shape. By 8:30 a.m., the team had reconvened around the kitchen table. By noon, we had the basics of the plan ready. My next stop was a lawyer that Uncle Mike recommended. I needed someone who had successfully represented guys like me, husbands who had been cheated on by their wives. I walked into the law office of Beach at 1:30 sharp. After introductions, I was seated at a table with the second of the three Beaches. Meredith Beach Cochran was a pleasant-looking woman who I guessed was in her late 40s. She had steely blue eyes and a firm handshake. We exchanged pleasantries as best we could under the circumstances. I learned that she practiced family law exclusively and had never defended or represented a cheating spouse. It was obvious that she was well-versed in the law, yet realistic about the world of divorce proceedings in Colorado. "What do you want when the dust finally settles, Mr. Rexford?" "I'm not entirely sure yet, counselor," I replied. I know I don't want her to walk out of our marriage with a penny more than she brought into it, but I suppose that's unrealistic. However, the prenuptial agreement we signed clearly states the protection of my family business in the event of a divorce due to infidelity. I want my good name to remain intact, which means I don't want us to run and hide from the fact that her infidelity is the reason I'm suing. I want his name out there as the man she cheated with. I would love to see him fired over this, but I'm willing to put up with the public humiliation that awaits him. Besides, I want to become free and clean so I can move on with my life. Most of what you say makes sense, and I'm glad you've set the bar low for what we can expect from the courts. I have to ask you, as your lawyer, you're not going to physically harm them, are you? No, Mom, but when his name goes public, I can't vouch for what some of the more enthusiastic guys on my hockey team can do. Well, you're goddamn right, she replied with an evil smirk, raising one eyebrow. My mouth was open in surprise, and I just stared at her. Two brothers played at the University of Denver in the early 2000s, Jaxie, so I know the lingo. She winked. Well, Mrs. Beach Cochran, it looks like I found the right lawyer. Yes, Mr. Rexford, and you may call me Beecher if you like. Great, I'm Jaxie. Before I left, we agreed on the following. First, I would leave the IP file with her so she can scrutinize it. 2, she would file for divorce within 24 hours, and Jess would be served after school on Friday in the school parking lot. She thought the shock and awe would work in our favor. Maybe Jess would do something stupid that would help us reach our ultimate goal. 3, I will return home Friday night to meet our first conversation, and I will stay home and demand that Jess leave since the house was titled in my name. First, we would leave F.E. Ella for a couple more weeks to follow Jess's behavior before and after she was served with the divorce papers. It was a little frustrating as the bill was already running about $5,000. She emphasized a few other things. To stay calm, to let my family help me cope with the pain, and to continue living my life as usual, no matter how much I wanted to crawl back into my shell. At the end of our first conversation, we exchanged cell phone numbers, and she informed me that I could call her anytime with questions. Before leaving, I asked, "Why isn't the practice called Beach, Cochran and Beach?" She smiled. "I'm a patient woman, Jaxie. Daddy has about 3 years left before he retires, and when he does, I'll be senior partner. Then we'll be known as Beach, Cochran and Beach." I sent Jess a text as I walked out of her office. "Finished with this mess on my way, I'll be home around 6. She replied, "Can't wait to meet you." She added some emoji with a red heart. I immediately deleted the message. I went back to my folks for a couple hours to bring them up to speed. Mikey was there with Mom and Dad when I arrived. I called Grandpa and brought him up to speed. "You're already talking better, Thomas. I'm proud of the way you're holding yourself together, young man." At 5:30, it was time to head home. When I arrived, I had already made my plan for the evening. Jess was upstairs, but when she heard the sound of the door, she came downstairs. I met her in the kitchen and we exchanged kisses and intimate hugs. Nothing too much, but enough to keep her from guessing something was wrong. I showered, changed, and we made a simple dinner of burgers and a big salad together. I realized that I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours and suddenly felt hungry. As dinner drew to a close, Jess began to flirt. She was wearing a baggy shirt, no bra and leggings that left little to the imagination. She lifted one of her legs and placed it in my crotch. That was the damn hard part, as I got hard almost instantly. The thought of sex with Jess disgusted me, but she was still my wife. "You may have had to be Jacker last night, but I hope Jaxie takes his wife upstairs and blows her brains out tonight." "Sorry, babe, but my head is still splitting from the strain of the last 2 days and driving in the goddamn snow." She looked a little surprised. I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of times I'd turned her down for sex over the years, and still have 5 fingers left. "I understand, I'm sorry," she replied, clearly disappointed. "Since I'm not working today, why don't you have fun with Chuck at the Hampton Inn?" No, I didn't say that, but I really wanted to. "How about we take a bath and I give you a good back rub?" is what came out of my mouth. Not quite ready to admit defeat, but when I gently removed her foot from my lap, still smiling at her with my loving husband's smile, she gave in. She took a long hot bath and I gave her a nice back massage, all the while fighting the temptation to strangle her. After about 20 minutes of my gentle touches, I heard her breathing softly in her sleep. I got out of bed and covered her. Then I moved as far away from the bed as possible and fell into a restless sleep. I had a hockey game the next night, and she knew better than to suggest I skip it since I missed the game on Monday. Thursday night was more difficult, but her parents had us over for dinner, so that made it a little easier, although it was clear on the way home that she was intent on something tonight. I had anticipated this and discreetly texted Uncle Mike right before we left. 2 minutes after we pulled up to the house, Uncle Mike called just in time. "Thomas, sorry to bother you, but it looks like you're driving. Are you in the car with Jess?" "Yes, Uncle Mike, we just had dinner at Remington's." "Okay, hi Jess, honey." "Hi, Uncle Mike. We're a little busy. Could Thomas call you back in the morning?" She winked at me, giggling softly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but this can't be allowed to happen. Thomas, Jackson's investment file wasn't finished today. I know you were out of the office all day with Mitchell's firm, but Tina went home sick with the flu, and you know we have to have it ready for tomorrow's 7:30 a.m. meeting." "Damn, Uncle Mike, really?" pretended I did. Letting out a fake sigh of frustration at Jess and an Oscar award-winning sigh of disappointment, I continued. "Okay, I'll drop Jess off and meet you at the office in 30 minutes. "Thank you, Thomas." "Again, Jess, I'm sorry. Uncle Mike, you owe me and Jess a steak dinner for the next 2 weeks. At Capitol Grill, not Texas Roadhouse. It's a deal, kiddo." "Damn it, Thomas, this is getting very unpleasant," Jess complained loudly. What does a girl have to do to get her husband in bed with her? I will refrain from the answer that came to my mind at that moment. "I know, babe, but I'm sure you'll get a break one of these days and you can do things at your leisure." If she caught on that I said you instead of we, she didn't give a hoot. For the last 10 minutes of the trip, she just hummed and sulked and slammed the door when she got out of the car. I rolled down the window and shouted with fake hope in my voice, "I won't be in for another 3 hours at the earliest, babe. Why don't you wait for me?" She didn't flinch once or turn to face me. She just waved me off over her shoulder and walked into the house. Yeah, that's right, screw you. Friday was the most unproductive day of my career. I arrived early, leaving Jess a note that I would be there before dawn to ensure we had an uninterrupted evening. After sketching out some paperwork that I was behind on, I made a few calls to clients. When I looked up, I was sure it would be around noon. It was actually 9:30 in the morning. I told my assistant Donna that I was heading to the gym where I was working out furiously. After meeting Dad and Uncle Mike for lunch, I went back to the office where I spent 2 more unproductive hours and then headed home. I arrived an hour before Jess was expected to show up. Just as I was approaching the front door, Jess was finishing up her last class of the day. Chuck slipped into her classroom with a lecherous grin. Sweetie, how about a detour on the way home this afternoon? Chuck was a good-looking guy and could charm any of them. However, Jess was a woman who was born with a face that allowed her to get her way, and she was getting bored with her paramour. She had to admit that he was very good in bed, but he had a job that had quite a ceiling. He was never going to be rich, and besides, he was 15 years older. Besides, he wasn't about to leave his wife and 3 children. The more she thought about it, the more she realized Chuck was a dead end. She needed to be done with him, but she wanted to politely let him go since he would still be her boss. I'm sorry, Charles, but Thomas and I haven't worked all week and I need to get to his house. How about we meet late Sunday night? Thomas has a hockey game at 5, so I could meet you between 4 and 6. I'll let you know at the end that we had fun. But we're done, she thought to herself. Chuck wasn't happy, but he understood. Maybe it wasn't too late to talk his mother-in-law into taking the kids out for the evening. His wife wasn't as beautiful as Jess, but she looked fine. Okay, I'll pick you up at the bus stop at 4 sharp. She heard him whistle as he left the classroom. Jess was relieved that she was going to break up with Charles Wellborn. He was treating her like a princess, yet he was beginning to think he was entitled to her. She had always had the upper hand over the men in her life, even to some extent over Thomas. Neither Charles nor any other man was going to control her. After sitting for another 30 minutes working on math test papers, Jess began to realize that she absolutely adored her husband. He was strong with her when she needed him to be, but also pampered her as she deserved. He was a wonderful provider and would make a wonderful father, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. Deep down, she knew she could never promise herself that she would never cheat on him again. But she made a promise to herself to rededicate herself to loving him. The synapses in her brain that help connect love, loyalty, commitment, and honesty as the foundations of a healthy marriage were not working. She was completely oblivious to the guilt and shame she should have been feeling. Jess should have realized how selfish and narcissistic she was deep down, but she didn't. It hadn't occurred to her that her true ugliness reached down to her very bones. But all of that was about to change. Excuse me, are you Mrs. Jessica Rexford? The woman asked, approaching Jess in the parking lot and carrying a manila envelope for legal documents. Beecher always used women when he approached wives. Unremarkable women tended to dispose other women. Yes, it's me. Sorry, I don't recognize you. Who are you? I have an important document to deliver to you, so pardon the question, but can I see some ID? Sure, Jess replied, simultaneously embarrassed and curious. The polite, friendly ploy worked every time. A faculty lanyard hung around Jess's neck. She buttoned it and held it out. Will this be enough? Great, thank you. Mrs. Jessica Rexford, you've been served. The woman offered Jess a folder, which she held out and accepted. The server turned abruptly and walked away, wondering why some women were so stupid. The dumb ones always accept papers without thinking, she pondered as she got into her car and drove away. Wait, what? I don't understand who you are. What is this? Jessica got no response, only heel and elbow bumps as the woman walked away. Slowly, like dawn on a dark morning sky, reality began to creep into Jessica's world. No, this can't be happening, she hissed, tearing up the newspaper. The words at the top of the front page screamed at her. Statement of dissolution of marriage. No, it can't be, her brain replied. Thomas would never do that to me. He adores me. He loves me. He can't know about Charles. We've been completely secretive. There's no way he could know. If he had known, he would have met me. Oh God, I've got to go home and make things right. She fiddled with the keys, dropped the papers, cried, gathered up some of the folders she had dropped, and tried to open the door. After a moment, she managed to gather everything up, opened the car door, and started the engine. Now she was sobbing and shaking with fear. She tried to slow her breathing, but having led a life almost completely devoid of real shocks or stresses, she was confused. It took her a few minutes to come to her senses and start moving towards the house. On the way, she went from hysterics to rage, then to tears, and then back to rage. When she got home, she would tell him what she thought. No one, especially Thomas Rexford, had ever treated her in such a shameful way. How dare he pull such a stunt in her workplace? Thankfully, most people had already left, but a few teachers were still on campus, and no doubt a couple of them had witnessed the altercation. By Monday, the language would be up, and the whole school gossip train would be flying down the tracks. It never occurred to her that she was the cause of her own pain. Her infidelity to the man who loved her exclusively was at the root of this disaster. By the time she pulled into her driveway, however, she had gathered her wits and decided to remain calm. She was sure she could explain away her affair with Charles if only Thomas found out about it. She would claim that he forced her to sleep with him to advance her teaching career. Yes, the battle plan was ready. She would never dare to sleep with another man. Thomas was her one and only, but she was too afraid to come out to him. She was embarrassed to tell him what had happened, and she was afraid his temper would get out of control, and he would lash out at Charles, which would lead to more trouble. By the time she walked through the front door, she was really confident in her strategy. When she came in, I was already sitting at the kitchen table. There was another folder on the table, but Jess ignored it. She was moving forward at full speed. "Thomas, my love, this must be some terrible mistake. Why would you divorce me? I mean, we love each other. You are my one and only soulmate. What made you do such a stupid thing?" I remained calm. "Jess, please sit down." She did. "Jess, I have learned some disturbing things about your behavior as my wife. I'm going to give you the opportunity to come clean and tell me the truth. I promise that I will sit and listen without interrupting. If you honestly explain to me why I'm doing wrong or misguided, I'll change my mind." Jess started to interrupt. I raised my hand. "But Jess, before you start, let me get this straight. I'm going to record our conversation on my phone so there won't be any misunderstandings about our conversation later. You only get one chance to be completely truthful with me. Please don't hide behind lies or misrepresent your actions. If you do, I can promise you that it's over between us and I will immediately proceed with the divorce. So if you want to share your thoughts with me, it's up to you." Ignoring the folder on the desk, Jess began. "I don't mind writing this down, Thomas, but I'll tell you the truth. Charles Wellborn forced himself on me. He used his position of power to impose himself on me. I fought off his advances time and time again, but he made it clear to me that my best way forward was into his bed. I hated every second of it, but I endured because I was overwhelmed and didn't know what to do." Jess started to cry as she continued. "I didn't want to tell you because I thought I could handle him, and I was afraid you would jump him and end up arrested or worse, in jail. When it became clear that there was only one single way to satisfy him, I did sleep with him. But it was only once, and I hated every second of it. Today after school, he was in my class and tried to get me to sleep with him before I went back to your house. But I turned him down. Oh, Thomas, I'm so glad you know now. You can help me put an end to his bullying. I can't prove it, but I've heard the gossip and I think he's done it to other teachers before me." At this point, Jess put her head on the table and began to sob. Clap, clap, clap. I gave her a purely sarcastic applause. I was heartbroken over her obvious lies, but part of me had to give her credit. Maybe after the divorce she could pursue an acting career. "Jess, I'm really sad, but I have to say it was an amazing performance." "Thomas, what are you talking about? How can you say such horrible things after I gave you my soul?" "Jess, you've always had a knack for getting your way with men, including me. You are so beautiful on the outside, and sometimes we are so gullible to believe that there is beauty on the inside too. Let me tell you what I know." With those words, I opened the file and began to lay out the case to Jess. "You've been sleeping with Chuck for at least 2 months now. Maybe longer, but I'm sure of it. The two of you go to the Hampton Inn in Inglewood." At this point, I started to move the photos across the table so Jess could look through them. She began to pale. At least 6 rendezvous in the last 2 months. Also, there was no Saturday morning math teacher meeting in early December, and there was no teachers' conference in Colorado Springs a few weeks ago. In addition, I have several recordings of your classes together. I've included one short snippet where she talks about how much she loves Charles and how much she enjoys their fun. So, my dear, loving, faithful wife, you certainly don't look like a woman who is kidnapped against her will, or one who tries grudgingly to please a cruel boss. Your voice in these photos speak the truth. You had fun with Chuck at least 8 times, one of which came during an entire weekend in Gunnison, and that only tells you one thing: a whore wife who thought she could get away with it. Jess sat with her mouth open, at a loss for words for the first time in her life, realizing that you can't flirt and flap your eyelashes and get away with it. I continued, "You broke my heart, Jess. I have no idea how many tears I've shed over the past couple months coming to grips with your betrayal. My relationships at work and in my family have suffered. My self-esteem has hit rock bottom, and I've asked myself more than once, why? Why did you destroy my love and our marriage for some fun on the side with a school teacher? I've seen pictures of Jess up close. He's no bigger than I am, and even though it made me sick listening to the two of you on more than one occasion, I know he's no better in bed than I am because he never brought love to it." My anger began to build. "But you know what, Jess? I've realized that you're no longer worth crying over. My emotions have been hurt badly, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to trust another woman. But I'm not going to crawl into some hole and die, because deep down inside, you're an ugly, selfish woman. I'm going to pick myself up and move on with my life knowing that I gave you the best thing I had, and it's not my fault. I'm far from perfect, but I've never given you a reason to treat me with such contempt and disrespect. I don't ask why anymore because I just don't care about you. Some people say the opposite of love is hate. But I think the opposite of love is indifference, and that's how I'm going to treat you. I'm not going to care for you or about you anymore. It's going to take me a long time to get over this pain, but from this day forward, you will no longer mean anything to me." "Thomas, No, Jess, no more. I packed a bag for you. If you want to go upstairs and get other things, that's fine with me, but you're leaving this house today. My lawyer's contact info is in the packet you got, so when you want to come up and get some more of your stuff out, just let her know. I'll make sure I'm not here. Take everything you brought with you into our marriage. What you don't need, I'll throw away or burn. But Thomas, please forgive me. I was too scared to tell you the truth. I messed up, but we can get past this. I want to be with you and only you." Frightened, Jess? Really? When have I ever given you a reason to be afraid of me? I've never raised a hand to you, and I've rarely even raised my voice. If you were afraid, it was only because you were worried you wouldn't be able to have your cake and eat it too. Thomas, I will not leave this house like a defeated woman. You can't kick me out. This is my home too. The Irishman in her had spoken, and she wasn't about to give up without a fight. Jess, I replied, keeping my cool. I bought this house with my own money before we were married. It's titled in my name. Fortunately, we don't have children, so you can't claim that you need the house for childcare. Our prenuptial agreement clearly states that I retain my assets if we divorce due to your infidelity. I know your looks allow you to get your way most of the time, but you should have read that document more carefully before you signed it if you're going to cheat and deprive me of my home. Thomas, I don't want to deprive you of anything. I want us to be together. Charles means nothing to me. I was already planning on breaking things off with him this Sunday afternoon. She realized it was a mistake as soon as the words left her mouth. Sunday afternoon, huh? While I was at my hockey game? Even if I believed you, and I certainly wouldn't, it would be too little and too late. I swear, Thomas, I have no interest in him. It was just an idiotic affair on my part. I have no excuses, but you can't ruin our marriage over this. We're supposed to be together. Yes, Jess, it was idiotic. It was also selfish and disgustingly cruel. But let's be clear, I'm not giving up on our marriage. You trashed it when you were having fun with him. You burned our love. You destroyed all of our love when you looked me in the eye and told me that on that Saturday in December, after I planned a weekend trip for us, you had a department meeting with all the math teachers. You are done with us, and if you can't see that, I truly feel sorry for you. All I'm doing is closing the book on our sham marriage. The full weight of her illicit bond finally got to her, and she began to sob. I sat there with my arms folded, waiting for her to pull herself together and leave. Finally, she spoke. Where will I go? What will I do, Thomas? It's up to you, Jess, but you need to know the following. My family is aware of what happened. They've been supporting me for the last couple months while I learned of your betrayal. I haven't told your family you'll have to do that. However, if you lie to them or withhold the truth altogether, I won't feel the slightest bit uncomfortable sending them a copy of this file. I'm not going to physically attack Chuck Renoff. However, you should know that by Monday morning, your principal will be aware of what happened. I will not be suing the school since the administration was unaware of your affair. But I certainly won't hide who you've been having fun with and how often. Chuck's gonna have to fend for himself. If his wife contacts me, I'll tell her the truth. I assume you know he has 3 children. Their lives will implode, and that will be on your conscience too. So, like I said, I'm done taking care of you. Where you go is up to you. Do what you want with Chuck or whoever you want, I'm done. The locks on the doors have been changed. I haven't touched your money or your accounts. You have enough to live on. You'll see that the divorce I'm offering is more than fair to you financially, given the circumstances. You can sign the papers now or wait, but I would advise you to contact your own attorney. Now, if you would be so kind as to gather all the things you need and leave my house. Jess finally gave up. She wiped her eyes, went upstairs and gathered a few more things. As she left, she came back through the kitchen. I sat in silence, emotionally exhausted from the confrontation, but relieved that it was over. I'm sorry, Thomas. Yes, Jess, you... And here I am, 8 months later, divorced and headed to Santa Fe. Why would I leave town, you ask? That's a good question. The answer is simple. I need some time away. I love my family dearly, and I know they love me, but as with my journey to Oregon 15 years ago, being on my own again was challenging. But at the same time, it was a breath of fresh air. I'll spend a year or two getting the business up and running, and then hire someone to run the New Mexico office. I'll probably end up moving back to Denver, closer to family and friends. Obviously, my hockey team won't win a damn game without me. But for now, a little space, a little time to dive into something new, a little adventure is just what I need. The only woman I planned on spending time with was Greta. Jess? Well, I don't know what she's up to. I heard that a few hockey wives and girlfriends kidnapped her for a fun girls' weekend when they found out what happened. I don't know anything about what happened, but rumor has it that Jess didn't get the most fun weekend. I guess she didn't expect this turn of events, but apparently hockey women are just as loyal as hockey men. Looks like her best friend Trisha and a trusty strap-on were the instigators. Chuck? Apparently, Doctor. Fielding, the school principal, came from a hockey family, because she made Chuck's work life as miserable as it could be. His teacher's contract was not renewed and he left the state. His wife took it out on him in the divorce, and I hear his kids don't want to talk to him. Interesting that she has become friends with Trisha and attends some of the hockey games. Before Chuck Huren left town, he fell down the stairs while leaving his seedy apartment in downtown Denver. He broke 3 ribs, his teeth, and his arm. All my hockey buddies were at O'Connell's when it happened, or so said about 20 witnesses. Well, damn me, maybe Bob Seger was wrong. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.